Welcome to the Amp My Pod community. Today we have Joe Casabona. I'm excited to have him on. I love your hats, by the way.
Thank you very much.
They stand out in the crowd. Like Larry
Yes.
Roberts, Red Hat Larry.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
say Red Hot Larry. Um, you could be like Yellow Hat Joe.
I picked the yellow for that reason. I used to wear fedoras. I feel like it fits. I'm like an Italian cigar smoking guy,
Mm.
but they got super hot in the summer.
Oh yeah.
Or like if I was on stage speaking with lights, and then I went to a Castro cap, and I really like that style.
Mm.
That's like the military style. Sarah, I think you're wearing one right now, actually.
Am I? Yeah, I just
Yeah.
started wearing hats because I kept my hair short, but it was too
Yeah.
short, shorter than I wanted. So
Ah,
now I'm wearing hats.
nice.
Well, it grows out.
But I mean, I love I'm usually wearing a Yankee hat, and so I decided
Mm.
to go with a branded Major League Baseball style New Era cap with the
Yeah,
new branding.
that's awesome. Well, so today we're talking about podcast workflows, and you are like the king of podcasting workflows. Like that's your whole niche. So let's see, where should we begin this conversation? Well, first, I'd be curious how you even got into talking about podcast workflows.
Yeah, so I mean, from a practical standpoint, my background is actually in software engineering, and I am an extrovert, and so I love podcasting, and my brain thinks like a computer thinks, heavy quotes there. And so it felt like a really good fit from a kind of what's my unique offering or skill set within the podcasting space. But the reason I decided to really double down on this was, and Sarah, I'm sure you've heard this story before, but I have three small children. Before the pandemic, I had one small child, and my wife's a nurse, and she was working a lot, and I therefore was not working a lot. And in November 2020, I had a panic attack because I wasn't producing my podcast, and a lot of sponsorship money came from there. And my income was like half of our income. And I was just very stressed. And my daughter came up to me, brought me a bottle of water, and said, "It's okay, daddy. It's going to be okay." And I was like, well, this is not okay to me, right? She shouldn't be taking care of me. I'm her dad. And so I realized that if I was going to survive as a business owner and a dad, I would
Mhm.
have to take everything off as much as I can off of my plate. So after that, I was like, okay, I have some automations in place. Let's just go nuts. What can I automate? If I can't automate it, can I delegate it? And so I hired a VA. I really leaned into the automation tools. And now it's basically like I record my podcast, I write the intro, and then I ship it off, and I don't see it again until it's live. So the skill set was there, and then there was the real life forcing function that made me really double down on it. And so I started sharing it. Lots of people, it resonated with a lot of people as podcasters are busy doing not just their podcast probably. And so this is something that I know a lot of podcasters need. There's a need for this in the podcasting space.
Mhm. Yeah, so okay. So you don't edit your own show or anything like that then? Okay.
No, and that was like even before 2020. I've been podcasting since 2012. And so 2012, my show was called Today I Learned. It was me and a bunch of friends talking about things we didn't know anything about. And I just released that Skype call,
Mhm.
eCam recorder style. So that was not very good because the topics weren't good. We didn't know what we were doing. And it was like five people. And five people on a podcast is just awful. Unless you have a really good moderator. And I'm not that. So 2016, I launched a new podcast. It was called How I Built It. It launched 3 months before the NPR podcast, but I got 3 episodes into that, and I had a guest who said a lot. I don't usually edit out filler words, even though it's super easy to do today with like Descript,
Mhm.
because I think it sounds unnatural. We breathe and we say filler words, but the 4 or 5 in a row
Oh.
gets very distracting. And so I was editing that, and it took me, I think it was a half-hour interview, and it took me, like, 2 hours to edit it, and I'm like, "This is a very bad use of my time." And
Mhm.
so I found an editor on Fiverr, and I was like, "If I'm gonna keep podcasting, I can never edit." But luckily, my show is sponsored from before episode 1. I could offset the costs.
Mhm.
If I was a hobbyist, I might not have cared, but I did care about the audio quality and the experience, and I mean, that's probably why my show grew the way it did and how I managed to get five-figure sponsors pretty quickly, but editing was never my jam.
Yeah. So do you still use the Fiverr person or do you use a company now to edit?
So the person I originally hired, I don't anymore because they were doing this thing where they would mark the job complete on Fiverr so they wouldn't get dinged, but then send it to me a couple days later, and I'm like, "I don't, if you need more time, that's fine, but don't do that."
Mhm.
So I have a new editor now, and I've been with him for, like, 7 years,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, I found him through some other marketplace or whatever, and yeah, it's great. He does video now too, so it's that was the big thing holding me back from releasing
Mhm.
video was I didn't wanna hire a second. It
Mhm.
wasn't about cost, obviously, because it costs more for him to do audio and video. I'd have to send him the audio, and he'd have to master it, and then we'd have to send it to the video editor, and he'd have to chop up the video and then send the audio back to my editor for whatever. The juice
Yeah.
wasn't worth the squeeze to me at that point. Now, after podcast movement and learning some stats and seeing things, I think you do need video. But I
Mhm.
think if you don't have an editor already, you find an editor who can do audio and video.
Yeah, exactly. The fewer people you have to communicate with, and step 1 is this person, step yeah, it can become a mess.
It's a considerable cost. My bill from my and he edits multiple shows for me. But my bill from my editor this month was $700. But that's also audio, video for a bunch of shows. Next month it won't be as heavy because it usually ebbs and flows like that, right? It probably averages to like $300 a month or whatever. But
Yeah, that's not bad. You said 3 shows for audio, video, 700? Okay.
yeah, so one is audio and video, the other is just audio. But the
Mhm.
other is me and my friend are interviewing local folks,
Mhm. Mhm.
and there are a lot more technical issues and
Mhm.
cleanup required. So it's definitely a harder job to edit that show.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's totally reasonable.
Mhm.
And if I want him to do an advanced edit where he scrubs through the whole episode, he can do that.
Mhm.
Usually it's just, I mean, you've seen the way I structure my shows. So I try to do a lot of front loading. This is the other thing to keep editing costs or time down, right? This is one of
Mhm.
those important workflows is
Yeah, yeah.
I do a lot of front loading
Mm.
to make sure we have a good structure to the show so we don't have to rearrange things. I've been trying to be better about not going off on tangents so that we don't have to edit those out later. But I also am I take good notes during the call or
Mm.
during the interview so that if we do go on a tangent, I kind of timestamp it. And Riverside and Descript make it really easy to find the actual timestamp. There's a good mix of tools and pre-planning and editing so I don't have to be like, "Hey, we talked about bicycles for 15 minutes.
Mhm.
Cut that out." Or like in the middle of this point my guest was making, they just started talking about how they hate turnips. So can you find that part and cut that out but merge it together so it makes sense? Like there's not a lot of that happening.
So tell us a little bit about your pre-show workflow. Oh, that rhymed. Pre-show workflow.
Pre-show workflow. I'm super bullish on solo episodes lately because everyone does interview shows and people, I mean, you and I have been doing it a long time, and so we've learned how to become good interviewers, but most people are not good interviewers. And so or most people aren't listening, which makes you a bad interviewer, right? You're just waiting to ask your next question. That's not a really good example. This is politically agnostic, even though the people I'm about to name, people have strong opinions about. But when Donald Trump did the thing with Elon Musk was interviewing him, but Elon Musk is a god awful interviewer. Like he was just like, yes, oh yes, and you also said that, and I'm like, this is not. this isn't good content regardless of how you feel about what they're actually saying. This is just it's just like one guy talking for a long time and then another guy going, "Yes, Oprah was an actual good interviewer. Andrew Warner's an actual good interviewer," right? Anyway, I think that most people do interview shows because they feel they have to, but then most people also there's a big learning curve for being a good interviewer. Okay, that was more than 10 seconds, and I apologize for that. But I really felt I had to put that out there. Pre-show workflow. Once a let's go the guest route first. Once a guest books with me, part of the automation is a Google Doc is created from a template that I use, and I think I can share my screen here. So what I'll do is I will show for the this is this does this go out audio only at all?
No, video as well, so I will remove myself from the stage so that you when you present, it'll be full screen.
Cool. Awesome. And then I can do this. Yeah, cool. So Emily Aborn is someone I just interviewed and she's an absolute delight. Strongly recommend her. But when someone books on my podcast, a document like this is generated based on what they filled out. I break the episode down into 3 acts. Classic 3-act structure is the setup, the conflict, and the resolution. And so the setup is, why is marketing important? Why can't I just build something and if it's good enough, people will come? Act 2 is a conflict. And for me, this is usually just like an obnoxious question or it's an inoculating question, right? In journalism, there's the idea of the inoculation effect. So when you're doing a piece like an article or a video piece, you present your thesis, right? Whatever you're talking about. And then you think about the questions that the audience is going to ask and you answer them before they have the opportunity to ask them. So you're inoculating them against the things that will cut against your credibility, right? So if I do this interview and I'm just like, yeah, market without social media, right? People would immediately be like, well, you need social media, right? So I want to ask that as part of Act 2, the conflict, but also the inoculation effect is happening here because someone's listening going, well, I need to do TikTok videos. Everyone says I have to. And so we kind of get into why. Maybe you don't have to, right? And then Act 3 is the resolution. For me, in this show, the resolution is actionable advice. Okay, you have convinced us that we need to do X, Y, and Z. How do we get started? And then pro shows is, I guess that's a little bit Act 4. Now you can see throughout, right, that I have notes here as I'm talking or as my guest is talking, I'll write edit. I think I have a cold open note here. But the pre-show process is mostly this. It's create the 3 acts and then the story beats for each act that we can go through. And again, that's all based on, oh, where are you? Show notes template. There we are. That's all based on this. So with Zapier or Make, you have these little template tags here. And with the Make automation I use, these things get filled in dynamically. And then the rest of this stuff I fill in myself, right? So Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, the pro show topic. And then edit notes. So something that's changed in my process recently, and this is post-production, so maybe we can touch on this in a minute. But I include the edit notes here too, as well. So that's the pre-show process. And I guess the last thing I'll do here, since now we're talking kind of in generalities of sorts, is I can actually show you where this magic happens. Here's what happens. This is going to look way more complicated than it needs to be for anybody watching. But when someone books a call or an interview for the Streamline Solopreneur, these things happen, right? So this is all part of the pre-call. Create that Google Doc from the template I just showed you, add them to the Notion database, and then this send email is to add to my task manager to remind me to do the post-show summary. I want to do that as close to the day of as possible for 2 reasons. I'd like to do it on the day of because now there's video component and I'm like conscious that I could be wearing 2 different shirts within the span of like 10 seconds. But it's mostly because I want to try to remember the emotion of the interview as well as because I could just put it through whatever chat GPT and be like, hey, what were the summarize this episode? What were the important parts? First of all, I asked, well, I use Perplexity. So I asked my AI assistant to do that. And it's like, I don't know. So they just told me about me. I'm like, that's not good. So I want to do it as close to the interview as possible so I can remember the excitement I felt during the interview and the part that really lit me up so that I can highlight that in the intro bumper, which I'll record, and in the text, which I'll write. And then the top takeaways I will use AI for because I'll just be like, give me 6 top takeaways and I'll pick my 3 favorite based on what overlaps with what I wrote down. So that's the whole pre-show process. For solo episodes, it's moderate. It's somewhat similar, except all of that stuff happens in Notion in my episode planner. But I still try to do the 3-act structure for that. What I'm toying with after podcast movement and some of the discussions I had was instead of 3 acts, have segments. And so instead of me talking for 20 to 30 minutes about some topic, it'll be like, okay, in this segment, I'm going to talk about a thing I'm thinking about. In this topic, I'll highlight an automate, or in this segment, I'll highlight an automation. And in the third segment, I'll highlight a listener mail or something like that. So I'm toying with that idea. Feels like I should do that, but I haven't implemented it yet. So to be determined.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you use Make over Zapier, it looks like?
Yeah, I mostly did that because Make gives me the same stuff that I need for like 90% of the cost.
Uh,
Something that Zapier does that annoys me is I understand giving like 1 or 2 months free if you pay annually, but Zapier's like 40% discount if you pay annually. I really don't like that, and I get why they do it, and hopefully they get why I don't like that, right? If I wanted to pay for Zapier for a year, it would be like $500,
mm,
but because I was paying monthly, it ended up being whatever. Oh, I might have done the math wrong there. Maybe it'd have been like 99.45. So maybe it would have been like 3 and change versus like 450 or $500, right?
mm,
It was a significant increase.
mhm.
Whereas Make, I pay $11 a month.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah. The
quite different.
trade-off is that Make is not, I would say, not as user friendly. I would say the learning curve is higher.
Oh.
But because I think like a computer, that's fine. I think it probably took me about a week to figure out the difference, not a straight week, but a week working on it here and there to figure out the main differences between Zapier and Make and then understand how things work, right? Because with the main difference is that with Zapier, they charge you per task, which
Uh-huh.
is each time an automation runs. The whole automation, right? So if you have a 3-step automation and it runs once, that's one task.
Mm.
With Zapier, nope, with Make, am I confusing myself right now? I was just talking about Zapier.
Mhm.
Zapier charges you per task. You can have multiple steps per task. With Make, they charge you per operation, where
Mhm.
each step in the automation is an operation.
Mm,
So with Zapier, you get, I think on the free plan, you get like 100. On the base plan, let's say you get 1,000 tasks per month,
mhm.
right? So that's all of your automations running up to 1,000 times.
Mhm.
With Make, you get 10,000 operations.
Mm,
But if the one I was just showing has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 operations in the single automation,
mm,
and so this automation costs 5 operations to run,
mm.
which means if I'm running it every minute, even if all the steps don't trigger, at least one step triggers, right? Because it still
Mhm.
has to check for something. So Zapier abstracts that away. And
Mhm,
for some people, that's still that's totally worth it, and that makes sense. Plus, they just rolled out a new pricing structure
mm.
that makes the plan more affordable. But it's still like $20 per month if you pay for a year, and like $30 if you pay $30 per month if you pay for per $20 per month if you pay for the year,
Mm.
$30 per month if you pay monthly.
Well,
That's just annoyingly aggressive to me. When I'm working on an automation, like a automation for podcasters course, and I'm
mm,
going to use Zapier, right? Automation is already scary to a lot of people. And if I have to be like, well, operations are like this, and then and you have to make sure you don't run them too often, that's that's going to be too scary for people. Where it's like Zapier, it's like set this up, never think about it again.
mhm.
So
Yeah, so speaking of software and stuff, what other software do you use pre, mid, post just to organize your entire workflow from start to finish?
great question. So I use Notion for most things. I'm actually working on a video. I'm trying to grow my mailing list, and I don't know if Chanel Basilio, Growth in Reverse.
Mm-mm.
It's an excellent newsletter. It's like she will reverse engineer how people grew their newsletters. Super deeply researched, but I'm in her community. And we were just talking about a bunch of what's working for us, and someone's YouTube is the number one growth driver for my mailing list. And she said, well, it's really one video where I walk through a template I made, and then in the description, they can join my mailing list to get the template. And I'm like, that's
Mhm.
so smart. And I'm such a dum dum for not realizing that I should do that. So I'm going to make a video on this, but my Notion planner is kind of like the linchpin of everything. And again, I'll share this. Let me hide my
Yeah, let
stars.
me remove myself again from the
So this is, I'll go out of dark mode. I'm usually in dark mode when I record so that there's not a white shine on my face while I'm recording. But this is a little easier, right? So, okay, so you can see here, first of all, right? Each of these guests match 1-to-1 with the Google Docs you saw. The Google Docs are an entry here. And so I see a full overview of my show for the next 4 months, right? In December, I take a break, and so I'll kind of reset all of this. And you can see some of these are solo episodes. And then inside Notion, I have these templates based on the type of episode. And so this is one I need to rework. But for solo episode planner, I still have this post production notes, act one, act two, act three, and then the pro show topic. So when I'm preparing a solo episode, it's here. It's all here, right? The beautiful part of this and all of it being in Notion is Notion's built-in automations are trash. I'm not even gonna mince words. They're trash. So the nice thing about Notion is that while their internal automations are trash, their API, right, their external automations are pretty robust. And so there's one here where when a new here we go needs edit, right? I will put episodes into Dropbox into a folder called needs editing. It looks for a specific file called the instructions file, because once I do the instructions file, we know it's ready to go. Once it sees that, it'll email my editor and say, okay, a new episode's ready for edit. And then it'll update the status of the episode, right? So I never have to look at interview scheduled. So if I were to add instructions for episode 436 to that Dropbox folder, this would automatically get updated to out for edit. And the same thing on the way back, my editor knows to put it back into the publishing folder. And so then and there's a solo episode. The status would get updated to ready for scheduling. And then it would get assigned to my VA, and she would make the graphics using the information here in the SOP we created. So Notion's a big part of that. Now, I will say, right, there's a risk to the longer the chain of your automations is if one breaks, it's all going to break. If a tool has built-in automations, use those. What's a good example of this? I think cal.com is what I use for scheduling. It is completely free. They make their money off of Teams. And something I really like about cal.com, which you also have in Calendly and the other tools, is I can send communications to my guests or to whoever books right from cal.com, right? Oops, cal.com is in the workflows section here. Streamline solopreneur follow-up triggers 1 hour after event. And you can't see my screen. Here we go. Streamline solopreneur follow-up happens 1 hour after the event ends. I email them saying, thanks so much for coming on the show. If you haven't already given me your headshot, upload it to this folder. Also, what's your address so I can send you a thank you note? I used to do this with Zapier, but I don't have to do that anymore, right? For a long time, my guest outreach was automated through this Airtable base where I would build a personalized email inside Airtable, but Airtable has really good built-in automations. And so Airtable would send the email, which means that I wouldn't have to worry about Zapier, the connection breaking, right? And then like 20 outreach emails not going out. If you can keep it to one tool, I would strongly recommend it. But Make and Zapier are both reliable automation tools to connect multiple things, if that makes sense.
Yes, I haven't well, I thought I had looked into Cal, but maybe I haven't. So I use TidyCal, which is an AppSumo product, a one-time fee,
Mhm.
kinda similar to Calendly, but I need to look into Cal. So do they have a free plan or
Yeah, I'm on their free plan and
okay.
it's extremely generous. I was on Calendly
Mhm.
and there was something my friend Sarah Loretta told me that cal.com, she told me about cal.com. And something that cal.com does is charge a no-show fee. So if someone books time on your
Uh,
calendar and they don't show up and they don't tell you they're not going to show up, then they get charged.
oh,
And I
interesting.
thought that was pretty interesting. But then looking into it, I saw not only do they do everything that Calendly does that I want it to do, but they also have the layout for SavvyCal that I really like.
Oh, yeah.
And it's free because they charge for teams, right? So if you need round robin, whatever,
Mhm.
that's going to cost money. I was like, okay, I can easily move from Calendly to Cal. It's going to save me $20 a month or whatever. It plays more nicely with Make than Calendly does as well. So I was
Oh,
also able to simplify my automations. I'm like, save money, great, but also simplify my automations. That's even better.
mhm. Yeah, I need to look into that because I don't think with TidyCal that they have the thing where you can send an automated follow-up post-show email, I don't think. Although, you know what, though? I think my current host is Captivate, and
Okay.
so people actually schedule now that I think about it, they schedule in through the Captivate link. Anyway, yeah, and I just use TidyCal for other things. But yeah, I'm gonna look into Cal. So, okay, so you use Make, Cal, Notion. What other software do you use or recommend?
So I'm currently using Riverside for
Mhm,
recording. I like Riverside.
mhm,
But a lot of questions I got at Podcast Movement during my brain dates were around editing. And as you
mhm.
know, I strongly recommend hiring an editor. If you're not ready to, I can't force anybody to. I do recommend Descript. It just makes editing
Mm,
simple edits, I would say, especially for solo shows, so much easier, right? And even sometimes I've been trying to keep my episodes to like 35 minutes,
mm.
which is hard because I'm a blabbermouth where I talk a lot. I don't let secrets out, I guess. But so when I get an episode back and it's like 40 or more from my editor, I don't have him do this. I don't, this is too fuzzy of a request, I think, for most people, unless you work
Uh,
really closely with your editor. But it's like cut out stuff that you don't think is relevant, right? My
mm,
editor probably would know because, again, I've been with him for 7 years and he listens to every episode. But that's a pretty fuzzy request. Well,
Yeah.
they had this conversation about fountain pens. Does Joe want to keep it in? Right. So when I get it back, usually if it's, or lately, I should say, if it's more than like 40 minutes, I will load it into Descript and using the notes that I took, right?
Mhm.
I will look for things to cut out. And so one time I'll say, I interviewed Mike Schmitz. He is a co-host on the Focused podcast and he does a lot of stuff with Obsidian. And we were talking about personal knowledge management. And I kid you not, we had a 12-minute conversation about fountain pens
Oh,
and then
wow.
running. Yeah. Because he runs, I ran, well, running is not the right term. I have participated in half marathons and completed them. Yeah, right. I was acting like I was running, but the speed was not a run. So I thought I love this conversation and I left it in for members, but for the main show, I was like, this is irrelevant to what we're actually talking about. The completion rate for that episode is 68%
Mm,
versus like 45. There's a very obvious benefit to that. I try to keep it to 35. If it's like 37, I'm not going to look for 2 minutes to cut.
mhm.
But if I'm like 5 minutes over, then I'm like, okay, what? Surely there's something I can cut out. So you saw in the note with Emily Aborn, I had edit question mark dog talk. I told a side story about how I don't, this is going to upset you probably and everybody. It upsets everybody.
Mhm.
I don't like dogs. I don't like animals. I'm
Really?
not an animal person.
Oh.
And so I talked about this. My wife wants a dog and my kids want a dog and I don't want a dog. So we're going to compromise and we'll get a dog because I'm still a good dad and husband. So, but we talk a little bit there for that. I'm like, feels like this anecdote is not really adding to
Okay.
the actual conversation. And while there is benefit in letting your personality shine, we were in the thick of the main point of the episode.
Mhm.
And so I didn't want to distract from that. Or I don't want to so when I get it back from edit, I'll listen or maybe I'll just tell him to cut it, right? Yeah, this should go.
Mhm.
My listeners, if they've been with me a long time, have heard me say this before. So that's the kind of stuff that like with Descript, my workflow is vastly improved because I don't have to load it into Logic or GarageBand or Audacity or whatever and scrub through or even get it transcribed and try to line up the transcript. I can just search for compromise and get a dog because I know I said that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love Descript. That's one of the tools I use. Okay, let's see. So I guess you don't probably use any post-production tools because you have an editor. So what does your post-production process look like?
It's pretty light. I really don't see the episode again. Oh, so it's talking about, they were talking about the Streamline Solopreneur here. For podcast workflows, which is a podcast I host, and that's mostly a solo show. I do have post production for that, right? Because that is either fully scripted based on a blog post I wrote or very tightly outlined. And so with that, I will take the file. I'm recording video. So I'll take the file, extract the audio, which Ecamm Live, that's the tool I've been using to show my screen and stuff like that. They record audio and video separately if you want it. And so I take the audio, I put it into Logic Pro. I have a chain of events that I have already tuned for my voice. So I basically just drop the file in and then press and then export it, applying those filters. And that's like mouth declicking, right? Because I hit that pretty hard and I hate that. I'm just really sorry that you had to hear that. So I hit that pretty hard and sometimes I'll take a big breath. Regular breathing is fine. That's people do that. But the big breaths there, like that, I want those taken out, right? Because people will say, "Oh, well, but you breathe in real life," right? I said that, but you're not breathing in someone's ear in real life. That's weird, right? And people are listening on headphones. So anyway, I'll put it through Logic Pro. I'll take that bounced audio, it's called, right, and I'll put it back into the video. And usually that's all I really need to do because I keep it tight during the recording. Or I'm live streaming it right? And so if I get a bunch of questions in a live stream, which is rare, but not very common, I'll cut out the questions and do the sign off and then put the sign off back. But again, that's pretty light because I do a bunch of pre-production planning, right? It's kind of I view it as the difference between like shooting a movie and doing like a live theater show, right? Both require a ton of work. But with a movie, there's going to be editing, there's going to be VFX, there's just a bunch of post production that you're going to have to do. And if you're telling a story or you're doing some sort of audio drama or fiction, you're going to need that, or it's your show will greatly benefit from that. But for the information transfer sort of stuff that I do, I can view it more of I'm going to see Les Mis this weekend, pretty psyched about it because I haven't seen that live yet. And so they rehearse and memorize their lines and they do a whole lot of pre-production stuff so that they can deliver a really good live show. And that's the process that works best for me. I want to make sure, especially for my solo shows where I can control everything. I can't control what the guest is going to say all the time. So I have to edit there. But for me, I got a good setup. I don't have a dog. And so I have children, but they know when the recording light's on to not pretend an earthquake is happening right above me. But I have good equipment that filters that out. And so my solo shows, it's almost all pre-production work. And then it's cleanup for post-production. So I guess in this live theater example, it's making sure the microphones are on properly or throwing it through a live filter to make it less echoey, right? Getting the lighting right, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so now does your editor also do the graphics and stuff? I can't remember if you do episode specific artwork or social media posts or any of that kind of stuff.
I don't do social media posts. I
Okay.
don't think that I haven't found them to be helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
What I'll do sometimes is say like, "Hey, I just interviewed blah blah about blah blah. It's really cool. Here were the takeaways. If that sounds interesting to you, head over to streamline.fm or whatever to subscribe."
Mhm.
Or I will do a full solo episode for podcast workflows and then I'll give like a minute overview of that. Or vice versa, right? I'll release a short form and I'll be there's more to this. It's like similar topics but not reused content, right? Because unless you are a huge podcast, sharing clips on social media is not going to get you more listeners. And if you want the content out there, you should make the content for the platform. Again, going to my movie versus live theater, you can watch a recording of, okay, Hamilton's a really good example of this, right? If someone had just sat with a camcorder in the first row for Hamilton, that would be a terrible viewing experience on your TV. But what they did was set up a bunch of cameras and mic everybody up a certain way and edit the shots to make it more desirable. They repurposed that content for the medium that they were putting the content out on, right? When I go to the theater, I'm not expecting to see the show in multiple shots because I'm sitting in a seat and I'm not an obnoxious idiot who's going to just move seats all the time, right? That would be crazy. So if you want to leverage short form, definitely leverage short form, but having a short form clip of just a minute of a 60-minute interview, that ain't it. I don't like that. I don't think that's going to do it. So instead, it's like, hey, I just recorded a podcast episode where I talked about 3 things about editing. You should do X, you should do Y, you should do Z. I just said 3 things, so I could have counted it down. If you want to learn more, like head over to podcastworkflows.com, right? Even that probably doesn't work on TikTok. You want a complete thought in your short form videos. I think that's the best way to do it because then you're just being top of mind. And then people are like, oh, this guy looks interesting. What else is he doing? Right. And because I'm going to beat these analogies to death, a good analogy of this is Coca-Cola, right? They advertise at the Super Bowl every year. They do not need to advertise. No one since 1947 seen a Coca-Cola commercial and go, what is that? I've never heard of this soda before. They do it because they want you always thinking about Coca-Cola. You just watched the Pepsi halftime show. Well, now it's the Apple Music halftime show. But you just watched the Pepsi halftime show and you're about to see a really good Coca-Cola ad. Well, now you're thinking about Coca-Cola. Maybe you go get one from your fridge. And they're not tracking John Boy Media right now. They're advertising Mountain Dew. And the call to action is literally, if you don't know where to get Mountain Dew, go literally anywhere. And you'll find, like, is Mountain Dew tracking that? Absolutely not, right? They just want the John Boy Media guys talking about Mountain Dew because they know that John Boy Media's demographic is mostly male, let's say between 18 and 30. And that's their demo for drinking Mountain Dew. That's how I think you should approach short form video for your podcast. Not like, oh, I created this video and now people are going to click
Mm.
and watch it. It's just going to be like, oh, I want people thinking about me and the things that I talk about.
Yeah, that's what I feel too, is clips or anything on social media is more just to remind people that you exist. It's not really
Mhm.
gonna convert many new people over to listen to your podcast, but,
I mean,
you know.
imagine you're walking your dog and someone in full marathon gear is like, hey, run a marathon with me right now. I'm not, I just ate lunch. I have a dog. I'm wearing jeans. Not
Yeah,
ready to run a marathon. That's
my
like,
dog would not be able to do
yeah.
that, he's a pug.
So now you're like, I got to put my dog somewhere. Like, that's like kind of what it is. If you're like, hey, you're on TikTok right now. How about you trade this 1 minute video for a 60-minute interview you might be interested in? People are going to be like, no, I'm not ready for that. I'm just in line at the grocery store. I'm not ready for this commitment.
Mhm. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing your insights and workflows. We only have a couple minutes left. Did you have any questions, Lynette?
I did put a question in there. The conversation was great. There was a lot of gonna do that, do that, do that. Like right now, I do all my editing, everything. Like a workflow is me, manual, that's it. And so I appreciated some of your suggestions. But I guess from my perspective is I always have a guest on my podcast. And so one of the things I was thinking about is I do use social media to create a little reel. It's a bit of a hook, da 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 da, and then get it out there. And then I add them as a collaborator, and then they share, and then that helps to get more views and get more eyes on the podcast. But not all the time do they do this sort of cross promotion strategy, if you will. And I was thinking, since the podcast movement, as you also, Joe, came up with some ideas from that, was making it more of an obligation for them too, because really, the guests that I talk to them about their story arc, how they got started in their business or write their book. But then we do touch on their business and their book. And so it's sort of, okay, well, that's me helping you promote your book or your business. And so how do I get it so that they do some collaboration of promoting? I've never made it an obligated thing.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I will give you a technique and then a tough truth, right? The technique is you want to make sure that they're talking about something that they don't always talk about, right? Because then that makes it worthwhile for them to promote to their audience. If they're just talking about their book or their business, their audience already knows that.
Mhm.
But if you extract some story from them about like the time that they were sitting on the road and it was raining and they got this idea for their business and they haven't told that story yet, then they're going to be like, hey, go, I've never told this story before. Go check it out. Right. Or this guest asked me a question I never get. Right.
Mhm.
Then they're more likely to share it. The tough truth is that, yes, they're promoting their business or their book, but they're also giving you content for your
Yeah,
platform.
of course.
And so I will ask my guests to share it if they want. Some of my guests have gone and asked for the video and have made short form video themselves, which has been delightful because I don't do that. But most don't because they're promoting their own stuff. And from my point of view, look, they gave me an hour of their time. They gave me
Mhm.
content for my members only. And so that's kind of where their obligation stops for me.
Mhm.
Yes, they promoted their business, but they also hopefully before that, right? Because if it's a 30-minute commercial, it's not airing. We just both wasted our time. But hopefully before that, they gave 30 minutes of value for
Mhm.
my audience. And it gives me the opportunity to sell to more members or get more sponsors or build my mailing list. So I think yes, we all want our guests to share our episodes. If you have a guest who's doing a lot of podcasts, they're probably not, because I try to share all the episodes I go on. Most likely I'm going to retweet or repost the host sharing, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to create my own post or send out a separate newsletter, because what I found is I don't control when the episodes come out. And so if I'm promoting something, or I've already promoted a podcast I was on, then I don't want to overload my audience with like, hey, I was also over here talking
Mhm.
about the things I already talk about. So I think that's the way to go. I will say there's one time because I do like to share. I at least repost, because I know how important it is to the host for that, and I appreciate. But I went on a podcast and I was like, yeah, I'll totally share it. Right? He's like, nobody ever shares, and I was like, okay, well, I'll share it. But he used AI to modify my headshot, and it looked real bad. He looks like Fabio, and I look like a troll, like one of those troll dolls. And I'm just like, hey man, I get that your show is about AI. Get it. But can you use my actual headshot? I don't look anything like this. And he never got back to me. And I'm like, I'm not going to. He like de-ages people. And I'm just like, your guests look like your guests.
Yeah. Okay.
So I didn't like that. But
I mean, to your comment about, was it the same thing? Do they talk about it all the time? Like if they're a regular podcast guest? When I do get reached out from these PR people who want their authors to be interviewed, I have a specific audience. I know my avatar to a T, and I get back to them right away and just say, yes, but it's not going to be exactly, or yes, and it's not going to be exactly the traditional. I'm not going to read the book. Like I don't have time to read the book. I'm not going to read the book. I'm not interested in reading the book. What I want is that one aha moment when she realized she was going to write that book, and why is she writing that book, and the mental mindset issues of writing that book. And so it is every time, and I always have a pre-call. And so on that pre-call, I make it very clear it's the story behind the author. And because my audience needs to hear how she overcame procrastination and things like that. And so it's not, and every pre-call, at the end of the pre-call, they always say, oh God, that was like, this is going to be so different than how I'm usually interviewed. And so, and then in the interview, it's usually the case. What I've learned from the podcast movement, and not to digress too much, is like, I've kept the interviews very authentic. I have never come up with a bunch of pre-questions.
Mhm.
I never edit. There's nothing left on the editor floor because there's nothing cut. But I realized I've got to do some of the things you were saying there. So get it crisper, get it more focused on one key message, possibly two, things like that. So it's all just learning. But yeah, I appreciate your insights today.
yeah, my pleasure. I've been doing this for 12 years. I learned a lot of things the hard way.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to ask the same 5 questions. When my podcast was growing quickly, I was asking the same 5 questions. Who are you? What's your
Mhm.
product? What failure did you experience? Because I was interviewing developers.
Mhm.
How did you build that? And do you
Yeah.
have any trade secrets for us?
Mhm.
And that was great until it wasn't. And I'm like, oh, people are
Exactly.
getting sick of me hearing the same of hearing the same 5 questions.
Mhm. Yeah, I like to dig into that pre-call to find out where she has stumbled or where she's holding back, sort of break down the wall a little bit too, show a little
Yeah.
bit of vulnerability and stuff. So, okay. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Well,
My
thanks so
pleasure.
much for joining, Joe, and thanks for coming on, Lynette. I appreciate
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad. I was checking my emails and I thought, oh God, I don't even know if I saw this from
um,
Sarah. But so I clicked on it and there we were live. So
oh,
I
awesome.
was like, perfect. Yeah, so it was great. I'm glad because I'm not a replay girl. I think I
Oh,
watch the replay, but I never get to the replay. So it's perfect.
Awesome.
well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for y'all's time today. And yeah, I'll post this in the group. And if anyone, of course, is seeing the replay of this, feel free to comment below and ask any questions.
I'm in the community, so if you tag me, I will answer.
Awesome. Well, y'all have a good day.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Joe.
Sarah. Thanks, Lynette.
Bye.
Bye.